Listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 236.
Today's podcast is brought to you by 1TDC.com. Dog agility can be hard on your dog's body. Help keep their joints and muscles healthy with 1TDC. 1-tetradecanol complex is a clinically studied blend of unique fatty acid oils that can support your dog's joint health. 1TDC provides a healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hititboard can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com. Today we're going to be talking about enjoying your way to success. And I mean this really in two different ways. I mean, enjoying the journey, enjoying the time that it takes to get you from point A to point B in your training or in your goals. But I also mean using enjoyment to actually create success. So I think everybody's heard the phrase, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I think that the thing that I wanted to point out in this podcast is that enjoying the journey is actually really important to your training. It's going to get you where you want to go faster, and it's going to fuel your training day in and day out.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the big ideas here is that many of us who desire to be very competitive in the sport, we're very results oriented, right? Can our dog do a running contact? Yes or no? Can they weave? Yes or no? Can they, run a course in this environment, this, high pressure environment with lots of people watching? Yes or no? And these are, yes or no questions. Like, can your dog do it or not? What we think of as results oriented, right? And we don't often think about, the process by which we get there. Right? That's so unimportant. At the end of the day, what matters is, can your dog do X or not? Right? And so there are even other things that you hear that kind of feed into that, right? Like your dog's performance in the ring is a reflection of your training and skills as a handler, right? That's kind of absolute. Right? Either your dog does it or not. And it doesn't take into account this idea that we're going to be delving into here about enjoyment in the journey and the process. And so I think it's important to note for people like that, when you get fixated on the results, you undervalue the enjoyment, and even what enjoyment might be there can be diminished, right? Okay, now you're not feasting mentally, spiritually. You're not being nourished by that enjoyment. It's not something that you necessarily want to do. You're just going for these results. And then based on the results, you decide like how you feel essentially about the sport. So how many of you have ever thought this? I'm not going to go to nationals or Westminster or some event or trial or something because my dog probably won't do well anyway, right? Which may or may not be true. But you're kind of admitting to yourself that if I went and my dog did poorly, like we weren't quote unquote successful by that strict definition, the yes or no definition, did they cue, did they win, did they make the finals, that you're going to be unhappy, right? So your happiness is based on this success, right? This results-oriented approach. And you also know that if you knew that your dog would do very, very well, like they would always win, you would probably go to a lot more stuff, right? Because you enjoy the winning. You enjoy that ultimate success. And so what we want to do is kind of get away from that thinking, because it can be very, very destructive. And get back to the process and the journey, because a lot of times that success isn't going to be there. And I have seen this kind of success-oriented living in the agility world do very ugly things to people. Right.
And not so just, obviously, not just in the agility world. We see this, in life, when people struggle to find enjoyment in the day to day, they struggle with the bigger picture.
Right.
And we want to come back to the idea that, that enjoying yourself is actually going to get you where you want to go faster. It becomes like this loop, right? The more you enjoy the day to day, the more willing you are to go out and do the day to day. And it turns out that it's the day to day work that gets you to your goals.
Yeah. So if you like working out, you're going to want to work out a little bit more, a little bit longer, maybe than you had planned, and your results are going to be better. So, but first, let's start here with the science. And so there are many, many studies out there that are looking at these big psychological concepts. Happiness, right? Enjoyment, like trying to define these things, seeing how they're different amongst different groups of people and how they impact our lives and our psychological well-being and even our physical health. And so it's kind of a hot topic, right? And an interesting study was done, I think, back in 2007, where they looked at subjects who savored the moment. Right? They savored their happiness. Something good happened, and they savored that moment, as opposed to people who experienced it. They didn't, quote unquote, savor it, like think about it and be happy about it, and just moved on. And supposedly these people who were savoring the moment, right, really experiencing the enjoyment, had better metrics on happiness. And so that's one specific way that we can increase our overall happiness. So at the end of the month, we're like, are we happy 9 out of 10? Or are we happy 7 out of 10? The difference isn't right there in that moment at the end of the month, but what we were doing on the day to day, right? Savoring each of those wins. And so let's start there by thinking about the little wins, right? We're not thinking about winning Westminster or making the final or being the fastest dog in our breed. We're thinking about what we are accomplishing in any one given training session or day. And I think that's a really big one. It's been a big one with me with these puppies. Right? Because I think given we've had several dogs, right? We've had a lot of success with our previous dogs. And so the bar of performance and accomplishment is really, really high, right? Like these dogs are going to have to make finals at big events. They're going to have to go to these championships and finish in the top 3 to be even as good as dogs we have had in the past, right? And so by that definition of success, they can't even begin to touch or taste that success for years. Right? It may not be until they're 3, 4, 5 at a minimum. They're not even going to be really seasoned until they're 5 or 6. And so how are you sustaining your work and your enjoyment when you are never tasting that quote unquote ultimate success? Right? If that's what's driving you.
And I think this, reflecting on your little wins, I think that this is really about the day to day. So we're not even talking about, okay, let's not focus on nationals, but let's focus on your next trial and what you did good there. Yes, that's part of it, but we're really talking about every single time you go out with your dog, what is the little win for the day, right? You go out and you have a session, and what can you, after the session is done, look at and say, I'm happy with this piece. Let me think about how I'm happy with this piece, right? I'm happy with my dog's focus today, or I'm happy with my dog's speed today, or I'm happy with my dog's speed on this one repetition. There was like this glimmer of amazing that I'm really going to pull out and think about for a moment and enjoy that moment, and do that with every training session every day. Find the little wins.
Yeah, this is a really big deal because I feel like Sarah does this much better than I do. Right? So between the two of us, I'm much more results oriented, just overall in general, right? And that thinking serves people like me very poorly, right? How many of us became doctors, went to, you go to college and medical school and do all these things and take all these tests and study so hard because you're always thinking, well, once I achieve this, once I graduate from college with a certain grades and test scores and this, I'll be accepted to medical school and then everything's going to be great. Then I will enjoy myself and then I will be happy. Well, it turns out there's another bar, right? There's another competition. There's another thing to do. And that success comes and goes instantly, in a moment, in a flash. And that enjoyment never really arrives, right? And so I think for me, personality wise, I've kind of been conditioned to this since I was very, very young. Like once you get on that kind of high achieving doctor path. And so I think a lot of you, non-physicians experience the same things, right? In your own life. And so Sarah just does a much better job because I know that there are times she walks in from a training session and says, oh, Emma, who's our poodle, our special poodle, right? Struggling a little bit. And she'll be like, okay, well, she did this better today, and I'm very encouraged. And then my reaction, my gut reaction, my instinctual reaction is to say, that's not good enough. She needs to be able to do this. Look at this dog. This dog is already doing this at this age. Or, the golden retriever is a month younger and is already doing, X, Y, and Z. Like, if she can't do this, then how is she going to be able to do that? Right. And then you're suddenly, Sarah's like, okay, well, today she tugged a little more strongly for, 5 more seconds or with a distraction. Like there was an overhead airplane, right? And then for the first time, she didn't stop in the middle of work and then just lose her mind and completely check out, right? And so that's a huge win. But if I had the reaction, and I think a month ago I would have, of saying, big deal. How's she ever going to be able to compete in the cameras at Westminster with all those thousands of people around if, she can't even do this? Right. So that's, I can think of an example of someone, me, who's not reflecting on the little wins. Like the dog shows concrete improvement and I'm just not getting it done.
And that's a rhetorical question. How's she ever going to do blah, blah, blah? But let me answer the rhetorical question, which is how is she going to do it? She's going to do it by doing a little bit better every day. And so that's why we want to focus on these little wins.
Okay. And I wanted to say about the little wins. It's not just sitting there because sometimes I think it's hard to come in and sit there and think about it. To finish a session, which in some ways can be frustrating, at least for someone like me, and even notice that there's improvement. So number one, you got to notice there's improvement. But here, let's use social media and make it our strength. Now, I don't post everything from all the puppies all the time, even though they do great things. Nowadays, like every breeder has their own group where all their dogs, they come and they post things. I don't even do that. Will occasionally send stuff just so the breeder knows we're doing things with the dogs. I'll send them a video or two. And I think that's a great way to reflect on the little win. You have a little win, something people can be happy about, excited about. And if you don't want to put it out there for everybody on Facebook and things like that, just send it to, your spouse, share it with your training partner, your instructor, just 1 or 2 people on the side or in a smaller group. I think that can be very, very good.
Yeah, like emotionally, an emotional boost. Now that you mention it, I hadn't really thought about it, and I hadn't thought about it in this context. But you and I do this, and it's kind of silly because, we live in the same house. We're both there. But if I go out and I work the dog and I tape almost everything and you're not there, and sometimes even when you are there, I pull out that one rep that I was so excited about and I cut the video. So it's like a 10-second video of the one moment and I send it to you. And I hadn't really thought about it in this context. I wasn't conscious of what I was doing, but that's exactly what I was doing. I was pulling out the win. I was pulling out the moment that I was excited about.
You're savoring it.
I'm savoring it and I'm sharing it. And it's, sending a training partner a 5-minute clip that has all of the dead time and the good and bad and saying, watch in the middle of this, she does something really amazing. They probably not going to watch that whole 5-minute video,
that's different.
But you pull out that one repetition that was great. And, you really do get that boost and you look at it again and you say, wow, when I look at this clip, this dog looks awesome. And I can see where she is going to get there.
Right.
You know, I can see the path in front of me. When
Right.
you look at the worst, any dog, no matter how successful, I can find you a clip that makes that dog look like they're never going to do anything.
Right, right. And that's why the advice here is not, reflect on your big losses. It's reflect on your little wins. That's what we're going for. And the crazy thing is when Sarah sends me these videos, it changes the way I feel about the dog.
Right.
Right. So some of that negative thinking, which I don't want, which I don't think is accurate.
Or helpful.
Or even if it were accurate, is not helpful. It blunts that. I think it makes it better.
Yeah. And I think this is very similar to the idea of the little wins is also to have something measurable every day that you are working towards. And the idea here is to get a little concrete. And the thing that I wanted to point out here is that this could be as simple as doing the next step in whatever progression that you're doing. It could be building a little distance. It could be building a little duration. It could be your dog being a little faster than they normally are. Those could all be, measurable things that you pick out as your little win. But they can also be things like recovering well. Your dog gets startled and they recover well. Some would look at that and just see the bad. The dog got startled. But finding that moment when they get a little bit better, because the problem is that you are not always going to go a little faster. You're not always going to build duration. You're not always going to what was the other thing that I said? A distance. You're not always going to increase the distance. Sometimes your dogs are actually going to go backwards. They're not going to be able, yesterday they were holding their sit for 5 seconds and today you can't even get to 5, right? So
sure.
The progress doesn't always go up and up and up. And so you have to find other things to measure against besides just, better, stronger, faster. It can be better recovery. It could be your own emotional recovery, right? Everything about that session went bad, but I was able to keep my cool and I was able to come in, take a break, reassess, and then maybe you go out and you have an even better session the next time.
I mean, I still kind of think of that as little wins. Like even when things go wrong, you find something good in the session. When I think about measurables, I do think about progression in general. So for example, let's say that you, Sarah, went to the gym, I don't know, 3 times a week and you did the same workout all the time. That's very different from you, Sarah, who goes to the gym and every time you go to the gym, you try and do 1 more repetition, right? Or 5 more pounds. That version of Sarah after a year is going to be lifting, 30, 40 pounds more in every lift, right? So it's probably going to look a little different, probably going to be significantly stronger by definition, right? Able to lift 30 pounds more that the other Sarah, the other version of yourself simply cannot lift, right? And so the idea there is that you can get big changes over a long period of time, like a year, by doing very little changes daily, right? And so those are the kind of measurables you need to find. And so in dog training, it's usually not like that, right? So at least for me, especially when I was working like as a resident, you work like 80 hours a week, being a doctor. And it was, did I train or not? And sometimes that's all you can do, But if you have the chance, the idea of making things a little bit more difficult or adding a little bit of proofing in there, as you pointed out, you're not going to be able to progress every day infinitely, right? Same thing happens in the weight room,
right?
At the gym, like it's simply not possible, right? And so the same thing occurs in dog training, but to have that goal, to have that plan, to say, okay, that start line, now I'm going to add some toys on the ground nearby. Now I'm going to have my friend come over and stand with their dog on a leash 10 feet away from my dog. Now can my dog stay on the start line, right? Every day, every session, like I'm making things a little bit tougher. And you go back and you make it easier, yes. But the idea here is measurable improvements, measurable goals, and that feeds in nicely to these little wins, right? Yeah. It's more than just, did I train or not today?
Yeah, and kind of going back to one of your initial examples of being too results oriented, do I have a running contact or do I not, right? Is that there are so many steps in between, right? And so those measurable results of the angles, as you raise your dog walk, for instance, or when you're doing teeter training, right? Went one link higher today, right? These are the measurable things in between the end point and the beginning that you can look at. So, all right, our next tip for increasing your enjoyment of the sport in general and day to day is to help someone else improve. And we get this in spades, right? Because we're instructors. But I think that every agility trainer out there can help others, right? You have friends in the sport. You have litter mates in the sport. You have training partners. You have classmates. And every time that you help somebody else in the sport, just the act of helping, chemically, releases endorphins, makes you feel good, and increases your happiness. But it also will help remind you of the common struggles, remind you that everybody has a different journey, remind you, if you are more experienced and you're helping somebody less experienced, remind you of your own journey that you have taken so far and kind of where you are now versus where you started. And so all of these things can increase your happiness when you help someone else improve.
Yeah, other people's success becomes part of your own story and your own identity. So I think before we did any kind of teaching, and I was just a competitor, ideas of success, enjoyment are largely based on how I did. Sure, some of your friends, right? Maybe your training partners, your school, maybe your instructor. A lot of people have pride in what their instructors do. But it's very different from when you go out and you deliberately help people, especially when they're outside of your immediate circle. I think of friends and colleagues and strangers. There's something more there. And I think even doing things like setting bars or running leashes at trials, that volunteerism helps. It really helps you change the way you think about the sport and your place in the sport in a really good way, in my opinion. So if this is something that you haven't really done, or if you've kind of gotten away from, or you feel like you're a little hyper-focused on your own dog, just take a step back, help someone else out, and see how it feels. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
And our last tip for enjoying your way to success is to stay in the moment. So we all have big goals. We all have big plans. But every time you go out to the field with your dog, that is its own distinct moment. And we can't get too caught up in how it fits into the bigger picture, in envisioning, what the future might hold for our dog, right? Sitting there thinking about how this session means that our dog's never going to get there, or this session means our dog is brilliant. Those are kind of future events. We really want to focus on the moment, this repetition, this set, and focus. I mean, we haven't even talked about the dog in all of this, but you enjoying everything, every single session is also going to affect your dog's enjoyment of every single session. And so every moment that you're in, there should be this hyper focus on the moment, on the repetition, and on your dog in that moment, so that you don't have any disconnect from your dog. But also just so that you are savoring those little wins in that moment. It all comes down to noticing what is happening now.
Yeah, I think for myself, I'm probably in a transition, several years long transition. I think it's been quite some time now where I can very much be in the moment easily and say, what's the next step? Okay, the dog messed this up. What's the very next rep that I need to do? Because that rep is going to look different now that the dog has failed rather than have been successful, right? So sometimes even before I start the session, I have these decision trees, right? Repetition number 1. If the dog does A, I'm going to do B. If they do C, then I'm going to do D. If they do E, I'm going to do F, et cetera, et cetera. So I've got all of these steps worked out, and I'm very focused. There's no time to worry about things like, is this dog going to ever, win nationals or something, right? There's just no time for that. So I think that's something everyone can get better on. And for people like me, at least I'm holding off on those thoughts until after the session, right? You're sitting around on the couch, you're at dinner with your friends. I think that's a nice time to maybe blow off some steam and talk about that kind of stuff. But honestly, it's probably not a good thing to do even then. And so for myself, I consider it like a bad habit. Like you're constantly evaluating this dog, right? You're like, is this dog going to be as good as that dog? This dog being your current dog, that dog being your old dog that, knew agility so much better than the new one that you're training now. I think that's very hard, especially for people who have had a dog, like one dog who is really, really good, or they really got along with very well. They had a really close bond. And then your new current dog, you don't have that bond, yet, or you don't feel like you're going to get there. And so that's kind of where you move out of the moment. Right. And in this case, you're not looking toward the future moments like, oh, are we going to make it to nationals? You're looking at the past. You're going back to those moments, those special times you had with your old dog, right? Your heart dog. And, that takes you away from the moment with this dog. And so I think that can be, detrimental, not just in your training, because I'm telling you that in my training, I don't do that. Right. But when I'm sitting around afterwards, I think that can be detrimental, right? Because it affects how you look at this dog. And it's very easy to take the bad session or several bad sessions and say, this dog is probably never going to be like that dog. Therefore, maybe I don't want to do this extra practice Friday night.
Which kind of brings us full circle to the entire point being the more enjoyment that you take day in and day out, the more you're going to train, the better you're going to do. It is actually going to lead to the success that you want. And conversely, for a lot of people, the more negativity you allow day in, day out, the less training you do, you fulfill your own worst fears. Right? Yeah. You destroy your relationship with your dog. You destroy your dog's confidence. You don't put in the time, and then your dog doesn't get there just like you were afraid of, right? Whereas when you put in that work day in and day out, you build a better relationship. Your dog becomes more confident. You build skills little by little. Maybe it takes them longer, but they get there, or they get somewhere. You and your dog discover the right journey that fits the two of you best.
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Fortnite. So Fortnite, okay. Yeah, Fortnite's a video game. You probably heard of it. Everybody plays it, like, I don't know, millions of people, right?
Apparently, it feels like all a billion. Kids. Yeah.
Mostly young kids. Isaac plays it. Hannah can play it.
Isaac plays it.
And so Sarah and I play it.
Yes, we play it a lot.
Like almost every night. And so we play with a great group of kids, who live in different places in the US. And some of them are very, very good, like professional gamer type level. They're very, very good. And so we approach the games very differently, right? And I think it's a function of kind of where we are in life, but also this idea of journey versus success. So in the most basic game mode, you start with 100 players, teams of 4. So there's 25 teams of 4. And if you're the last team standing, basically you win. You kill everyone else, you win. It's called a victory royale. We're always going for we want to win. The adults. We are always there to win. Okay. But sometimes Isaac and the other boys, when they're playing, they want to do things like work on trick shots, or they want to use less powerful guns to do certain things, or they want to experiment and play around and goof off or jump off a mountain and see if they'll survive when they hit the water or not, right? Things that aren't necessarily
optimum for getting first place.
Exactly. And so, but they find that very enjoyable, right? So they enjoy playing and doing all these things and experimenting and trying this or that and creating, you can even create worlds in there to fight in. Whereas we're just like, we want to win. And our perception of the session, let's say you play 1 or 2 hours and you play 5 or 6 games. Whether or not the night was a success is based on what?
Whether we got one win in there.
Yeah, whether we got a win, right? And if a pretty good night is like you got a second or a third, you're like, we were close, but we lost at the very end.
Right.
Right. And if you just kept getting killed immediately, game after game after game for a frustrating 2 hours, you're like, God, this sucks. I didn't do anything. Because we weren't looking at any of these things. We weren't like, oh, well, I did better with a shotgun this time, or I did better with a sniper this time, or I did better at dodging, enemies or whatever. Our strategy was better this time. We don't look at that. We only look at this ultimate thing, right? And so I feel like we are not enjoying the game in the same way that these kids are, right? So I think in that way, I would advise you to enjoy agility, like the game that it is, and, be the kid. And I got to tell you, these kids enjoy all of that, all those little things, and they're much better than us. Right?
Right.
So if you enjoy the process, you're going to play more, you're going to learn more. And then some of the crazy things they do actually pay off in big ways where they're able to get a win. Whereas people like us, we don't take certain chances. We don't practice certain things because we didn't see the value in them. Right. And it turns out that they had value after all.
All right. Learning from Fortnite. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, 1TDC.com, hititboard.com, and NTI Global. It's NTI Agility's biggest sale of the year. All items, all colors, all variations are made to order and on sale. These are the savings you've been waiting for. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com for the widest selection of dog agility tunnels for both competition and backyard training. Known for free shipping, more options, high-quality products, and low prices, NTI Global has got you covered. They also offer tamer and anchor weight bags along with a full line of accessories and agility storage solutions. Need your agility gear in a hurry? Don't forget to check the in-stock selection. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com today. Happy training!